all of those chromosome disorders you guys learned about or are learning about in the computer tutorial, most of them, most of the time, caused by what? What's the cause?
Nondisjunction.
Excellent. That word right there, right? Nondisjunction. I'm going to call in a volunteer, who's going to give us a nice, eloquent definition for nondisjunction. Some of you are doing the old don't make eye contact trick.
Making eye contact's the best way to
Yeah, some people know the reverse psychology method.
Yeah.
You look the person in the eye like, yeah. And then, he's not going to call on me. He wants to call on somebody who's looking away. Isaac, what's the...
Isaac,
I looked away, I looked at you. What
Yeah, you just can't win, can you? What's
Maybe it's when the chromosome goes baby. It's when you have 2 chromosomes in a cell, which is only supposed to have 1.
Okay.
Kind of.
Okay, that's kind of, yes.
It's when during anaphase the chromosomes, the duplicate chromosomes don't separate, and so they end up going into, like you have 2 chromosomes in one cell rather than breaking them apart into 2 and 1.
Excellent. Isaac planted and you watered. Okay? All right. Yeah, it's when a couple chromosomes forget, so I'm going to put quotation marks around it, of course. When a couple chromosomes forget to pull apart during meiosis, and so you get a sex cell that's got either an extra chromosome in it or a sex cell that's missing a chromosome. And I think we even talked about the fact that every human being on the planet, everybody produces a small number, thank goodness it's a small number, of sex cells that has the wrong number of chromosomes in it. Everybody. Even people who you think are perfect. Most people look at Mario and they go, "Oh, he's perfect."
He has some chromosome disorders floating around in there.
That's right. Nobody makes 100% perfect sex cells.
Except for Mario.
No, not even Mario. Okay. All right, so it's something to be, to cause a little bit of a spirit of humility in all of us, right? And so when you consciously make the decision, to produce a child, you just sort of hope and pray that it's a good egg and a good sperm that get together. Now, I'm going to share some kind of like personal information. Personal stories sometimes help us to remember things. About when my wife and I were expecting our 2 kids. And I remember, you're going to hear more about this period. And I remember at the time thinking, I was teaching genetics back then, human genetics, and I remember thinking, knowledge is good, but I almost wish I didn't know this stuff. You know what I mean? Because you get kind of oversensitized to it. And I've heard a similar thing happen with students who are in medical school when they start learning about diseases. Then all of a sudden they start thinking, like, do I have that? I think I'm tired all the time. Do I have that? You know, it just happens. You kind of get oversensitized. You start learning about stuff. So I just want to tell you, you got to keep in mind that most of the time when a baby comes into the world, he or she is practically perfect in every way. Most of the time, right? So the things we're talking about, yeah, they happen, but definitely not with every pregnancy. Okay, take a look at this. Now, this is probably, and you guys recognize this karyotype, right? You could be a genetic counselor. You could make this diagnosis, right? Trisomy 21, okay. Probably the most well-known, one of the most common chromosome disorders. Trisomy 21. Pretty recognizable, right? I want to show you a video clip that I found that I think should help us get to thinking about trisomy 21, so check this out, okay? Check it out.
Clara futura mamma,
Don't be afraid.
tu niño podrá hacer muchas cosas.
Podrá marchar. Podrá correr hacia ti.
Il pourra parler et te dire qu'il t'aime. Il pourra aller à l'école como todos. Il pourra t'écrire si un jour elle est loin.
Because indeed, he'll be able to travel too.
Il pourra aider son père à réparer son vélo.
Podrá laborar y ganar su dinero.
Avec son salaire, il pourra t'inviter à dîner.
O affittare un appartamento e andare a vivere da solo. A volte sarà difficile. Io capisco.
Quoi de possible? N'est-ce pas pareil pour toutes les mères?
Dear future mum,
Tuo figlio potrà essere felice. Come lo sono io.
Et tu seras heureuse aussi.
Mia mamma. Io mamma.
Any questions or comments?
Slightly depressing, but all right.
Are any of you guys in Best Buddies? Who's in Best Buddies? My hat is off to you. Good job. Well done. You know, I remember talking to a high school student, a young man, a few years ago who had Down syndrome. And what was really hard for him was kids would make fun of him. You know how some people are. And he told me something that really got to me. I hadn't really expected to hear what he said to me. He said, "Mr. Rule, I know that I am nowadays we use the word mentally handicapped, but back then the word mentally retarded was used kind of more often." And he said, "Mr. Rule, I know I'm mentally retarded. I wish I was not." And it kind of made me think. You see, some kids with Down syndrome, they have mild mental handicaps, and they know enough to know that they have it. And I think that would make it really hard.
Somebody with any mental disability.
Yeah, I think it would make it really hard.
If you're conscious about it, then you know that you're different.
Yeah, yeah. But among kids who have Down syndrome, there's a, watch this, tell me if this looks familiar. Tell me if this graph looks familiar. There's a range in severity. Does that look familiar?
Bell curve?
Bell curve. How many of you are taking statistics now or have had it before? Anybody? So you're really familiar with this?
Oh, heck yeah, I am.
Yeah, oh, big time. Okay. So some kids, all right, now watch. Some kids with Down syndrome, a few very mildly affected, and some of them even go to college. Most of them are in the middle somewhere, and a few at the other end of the continuum are very profoundly affected. But most of them are like in the middle somewhere. So it can vary a great deal.
Where would you put that kid that told you this?
The kid that told me that, he was like, believe it or not, he was like in here somewhere. Moderate, not mild, but moderate, not severe, not profound. That's what he was. So I want to show you something that that I've thought about. Maybe you have too. I don't know. Maybe you haven't thought about this. Check this out. Okay. Risk of having a live-born child with Down syndrome or any other chromosomal abnormality by 1 year maternal age interval. Okay. Focus that a little bit. Now there's another way of looking at this. That's the data table. Let's look at the graph. Okay, here it is in the form of a graph. Okay. What do you notice when you look at this? You got maternal age coming down here. Mamas from age 20 to 49, believe it or not, 49. Okay, what's it showing us? And what does this show us?
The older the mother, the higher risk of having a child with a chromosome disorder.
Good. The older the mother, the greater the risk of her having a child with a chromosome disorder. Right. Over here, we're looking at total risk for any and all chromosome disorders because there's a whole bunch of different kinds. You guys got this memorized yet? You're going to have to memorize this.
What?
No, just kidding. Just kidding. No, you're not going to have to memorize it. Over here, risk of having any kind of a chromosome disorder. This column, risk of Down syndrome only. Okay. Now here it is in a graphical presentation. So we've got age of mom down here on the x-axis, and on the y, number of affected children per 1,000 births. So, what are the safe years to have babies here?
20s, 30s.
When you're 15.
Well, yeah. There's another graph I could show you. If you're 15 to 19 when you get pregnant, you have a much increased risk for other kinds of problems with your babies. This one's just showing the risk of Down syndrome, okay? But women who are 15 to 19 when they get pregnant, much greater increased risk of having a baby that's born too small or too early. And babies that come into the world too small or too early have lots of other things that they're susceptible to. Brain damage, liver damage, all kinds of problems. Bless you. So, don't look at this graph and say, oh, it's totally safe to have a baby when I'm 16 or 17. Okay. Your risk of having a baby with a chromosome disorder is low, but your risk of having a baby with other kinds of issues is much higher.
It's not the Middle Ages anymore.
It's what?
So it's not the Middle Ages.
It's not the Middle Ages, right. It's not pioneer days anymore. So, but anyway, according to this graph, let's just look at this graph. We'll come back to this later. If you're 15 to 19 when you get pregnant, what's the chances of having a baby with Down syndrome if you're like 15 to 19? Can you see it from?
According to that, it looks like it's close to 0.
Yeah, like this is 2 out of 1,000, right? So way less than 1 out of 1,000. All right? 1 out of 1,000 live-borns would have Down syndrome. Less than 1 out of 1,000. How about if you're 45 when you get pregnant?
Around 20 out of 1,000.
Yeah, it looks like it's close to 20 out of 1,000. So if you're 45 when you get pregnant, the odds are still with you that your baby's going to be okay, but you do have an increased risk. In fact, after age 34, 35, see, it increases dramatically, right? So I think the moral of the story is, if you want to increase the chances of your baby not having some kind of a chromosome disorder, you want to try to have your kids between the ages of 20, I'd say 20 and 35. 20 to 35. Taya, got that? You might have to limit your family to 8 or 10 kids, but 20 to 35.
All at once.
All at once. Get it all over with, right? Be the octomom. Yep. Now,
College.
okay, if you have all your kids between 20, if you have all your kids between 20 and 35, it doesn't guarantee that your child would not have a chromosome disorder. Okay? But it increases the chances that the baby would be okay. I remember, well, okay, not that long ago, just in the last year, I know a couple, they are in their, let's see, if he graduated in 2000, okay, how old would they be, graduated in 2000?
36.
36. Yeah. They're just past the part of the curve going up. And they had a baby this past year who had trisomy 18. Does that one ring a bell from the computer lesson? Trisomy 18? Edwards syndrome. Right. And their baby died a couple hours after the baby was born. And so,
How long did it know?
they knew from about 4.5 months into the pregnancy. And they chose to carry the baby knowing that was a hard thing. They carried the baby full term knowing the baby would die shortly after birth. And that was a choice that they made. So that was a real difficult case because I know them very well. But I remember when my wife and I were expecting our second child. Now, some people, I'm going to speak very candidly here. Some couples, when they're trying to start their family, get pregnant at the drop of a hat. I know a couple, I know more than one couple when this happened, where they had their first baby like practically exactly 9 months after their wedding. Okay? And I know other couples who tried like 5 years before they got pregnant. And so it's just differences in fertility between different people, right? You know what? Fertility aligns itself on a graph that looks like this. Check it out. Some people, a few people get pregnant very easily. Lots of people sort of average, and a few people at the other end of the curve, it takes a long time for them to get pregnant. It's just like they go through periods of infertility and they finally happen. So I remember my wife and I, we didn't think we were going to be able to have any kids for a while. And so, and then we had one, and then like 3 years later we had a miscarriage, which was harder than I ever thought it would be. And then about 3 years after that, we were expecting again, and we were thrilled. You know, it's like we were thrilled. And we were 34. My wife and I were 34 years old with the second pregnancy. So according to this chart, if you're 34, what's the probability of the unborn baby having any kind of a chromosome disorder, according to this chart? 1 out of 238. Now, I was teaching genetics back then. Gosh, I was 34. I was young. Cheapers.
You still are.
I'm 63.
What? No way.
That's young.
That's young compared to Methuselah, right?
I thought you were going to say banana.
That's young.
Compared to Betty White.
Compared to Betty White, it's all relative. Compared to the oak tree in our backyard. All right, so anyway, I remember, see, I was teaching genetics back there, and I remember thinking, this is when I was thinking, I almost wish I didn't know this stuff, because I teach this stuff. And I remember thinking, okay, the chance that this unborn baby has a chromosome disorder of some kind is 1 out of 238. I remember thinking that. And then, but then I would remind myself, but the chance that this baby does not have a chromosome disorder is what? 237 out of 238. I remember more than once reminding myself of that. Now, it's not the end of the world if you have a baby with a chromosome disorder, but it makes life a lot more difficult, right? You guys, I don't know if you realize this or not, but raising a baby and then a toddler and then a rug rat and then yard ape and then preteen, okay. It's not easy. It's not easy. When they're real little, you change their diapers at 2 in the morning and all that kind of stuff. And when they're toddlers, sometimes they're sick in the middle of the night and you got to take care of them, but knowing you got to go to work the next, it's not easy, let me put it that way, okay? And then if the child has a chromosome disorder, then it's even harder. So it changes your life big time if the baby does have a chromosome disorder. So that's why I would think about it now and then. So, yeah, and I remember going with my wife to the doctor's office during a checkup when we were expecting the baby when we were both 34 years old. And the doctor was talking about, I remember he explained to us, due to your age, see, 34 to 35, the risk starts to increase. Due to your age, if you would like to, it's up to you, you could have a test done called amniocentesis. And I remember thinking to myself, yes, we learn about this in our genetics class at Jeff. But Mr. Rule, this is what I said to myself. Self, be polite. Don't say, oh yeah, I know about that, I teach this stuff. That would be rude, right? So I just sat and nodded my head yes as he was talking about what amniocentesis is. You guys know about amniocentesis, right? Where you put the needle, they put the needle in through mama's tummy into the uterus and they take out some of that amniotic fluid that's surrounding the baby. They take it back to the lab. They isolate out some of the baby's skin cells that are floating in that fluid. They put them under the microscope. They photograph the chromosomes. They make a karyotype. They check the unborn baby's chromosomes. Remember, if you forgot, there's a computer tutorial coming up where you'll go through all of that again.
Joy.
Yes, you'll love it. Okay? You're on tape. Did you know that?
Wait, what?
Yeah. Yeah, you're going to be a star. Okay, so anyway, he's telling us all about this amniocentesis we could have done. And so there we were faced with a bioethical dilemma. It wasn't easy conceiving. Finally, we're pregnant, we're expecting. Do we risk maybe an accidental miscarriage? Because sometimes amniocentesis, very rarely, can trigger an accidental miscarriage. Do we risk that? To find out what kind of chromosomes the unborn baby has? Do we do the amniocentesis? If we did, and we found out that the unborn baby had a chromosome disorder, would we terminate the pregnancy? You know, all those questions. So we actually kind of went through. Now, we didn't fill out the model, but some people, when faced with a situation like that, the genetic counselor might have them fill out a decision-making model to help them try to figure out what to do. So we didn't fill out the model, but we did talk about it, and we decided not to have the test done. That's what we did. Some people would have it done, but we didn't. And everything turned out okay. So, I don't know. I wouldn't wait until 45 or 50 to get pregnant, ladies. Any idea why the risk might increase as mom gets older? Why do you think that? Raise your hand if you have some idea. Why would the risk increase?
She's getting closer to menopause.
Okay, she's getting closer to menopause, that's for sure. But why would an individual egg mess up the older she gets? Isaac, what do you think?
Because it's been sitting for a while.
Excellent. Excellent. That's probably it. We don't know absolutely 100% for sure, but if you think about it, if mom's 40 when she conceives, 45 let's say, if mom's 45 when she conceives, then how old was that egg? 45 plus. It's been sitting in her ovary for 45 plus years, because remember it formed when she was an embryo. It's been sitting in suspended animation, and when it finally ovulates 45 years later, breaks out of the ovary, enters the fallopian tube, that's when it completes meiosis 1. Okay? And then if the sperm enters it, then it completes meiosis 2. Chromosomes have to pull apart. Maybe they mess up more the older that egg is, the longer it's been sitting in the ovary. And I can understand that. If I were, all right, sometimes on a Sunday afternoon I'll take a nap, okay? That's the only time of the week. Take a nap Sunday afternoon. And I did that yesterday. And when I woke up, I had the alarm set because I didn't want to sleep too long because I wanted to go to sleep last night, okay? So I set the alarm. The alarm went off. I woke up, sun shining. I panicked. I was like, I'm late for school. Does that ever happen to you guys?
Yes.
You're just kind of out of it when you wake up. Sometimes you're just sort of out of it. And I thought, oh my gosh, the sun is shining. I'm way late for school. What day is it? Oh wait, is Saturday? No, it's not. And I was confused for a while. I was like disoriented, panicked. And so, well, you know, I didn't know what day it was. So can you imagine how you would be if you slept for 45 years and you suddenly woke up?
I don't know, let's try it.
No wonder those eggs mess up the longer they're in the ovary. Now, sometimes non-disjunction happens in the formation of the sperm, but 80% of the time, when a baby's born with a chromosome disorder, 80% of the time, it was the egg that had the extra chromosome. Now, non-disjunction happens just as often in sperm production. Why do you think that would be? Why do you think 80% of the time, when a baby's born with an extra chromosome, It was the egg that had the extra chromosome. What, actually?
It's like if that egg's already bad, like it's just gonna stay there. There's all those sperm like going in, so it like decreases the chance of that one bad sperm.
Good. That's it. Eli, is that what you were going to say? What were you going to say?
I was wondering if it would, because of the polar body, if the non-disjunction, I don't know how to say that.
Non-disjunction?
Non-disjunction, when the cells did not separate, they would be more likely to go into the egg rather than the polar body, so that's why it would be more likely for the female to have.
That might have something to do with it. Maybe. The thing is, non-disjunction happens just as often in oogenesis as it does in spermatogenesis.
Yeah.
But I think actually hit the nail right on the head. You got it. That's it. If an egg has an extra chromosome and it's sitting in the fallopian tube or moving through the fallopian tube, that's it. That's the egg. If a sperm has an extra chromosome, it's got to beat out those 150 million other sperms. And so you get this dilution factor, okay? Yeah, that's probably it. Why do you think, now there's something else going on here. If we had a graph like this, age of dad, as dad gets older, risk of having a baby with a chromosome disorder, the graph would look kind of like, it wouldn't look like this. If we change this to age of dad, it would look more like a guy could be 70 and father a child, and there's no greater risk of him producing a bad sperm than if he were 20. The risk doesn't increase as dad gets older. Why do you think that is?
Always good to go.
He's always making new sperm.
Right. Any sperm that a 70-year-old man produces, that sperm was about 64 days in the making from spermatogonium to mature sperm. Takes about 64 days. They're made fresh daily, right? Not so with the eggs. So anyway, that's kind of how that works. All right, I want to show you one more little video clip before we quit, okay? I think you might find it interesting. So let's check this out. We're going to go back. No, we did that.
Not again.
Not again. Oh. Talk to us. There we go. Here we go.
Thinking further back, your aunts, your uncles, your cousins, anything at all in the family history in terms of handicaps or birth defects or mental retardation or anything that...
Today, there are genetic counselors whose job it is to determine if a couple runs the risk of passing a genetic disease on to their children.
How about your father? Anything he's treated for, diabetes, high blood pressure?
He's an excellent health and will be 74 next month.
And how about your...
The counselor often advises couples to have the same test used to detect Tay-Sachs disease, amniocentesis.
A little stick and some pressure.
Doctors take fluid from the womb and look for defects in an unborn child's chromosomes. The most common is Down syndrome, a form of mental retardation caused when the child has an extra chromosome. Dealing with the test results forces thousands of couples to make an agonizing choice. Rhonda and Steve were married 2 years ago and began talking about having children.
Yeah, we really wanted family, but we didn't know when.
We didn't really say, well, okay, now is the time to have a baby. It just kind of happened.
Yeah, right.
After a series of troubling early tests like this, their doctors suspected a genetic defect in the new baby. Rhonda went for amniocentesis and waited for the results.
She was a basket case, and I kept saying, nothing's wrong. Nothing's wrong. But I also kept thinking, what if they're right? You know, now what?
It changes your outlook on the whole thing. I mean, you don't have any happy dreams to think about. You it's just, there's something bad, but you don't know what.
They waited a week for the test results. On the day they were moving into their new house, one with a room for the baby, the genetic counselor called.
She told us that the results came back that we had Down syndrome, and here you are in the middle of moving. You're pretty much chaotic as it is, and it feels like someone just threw 1,000 pounds on you. And that was the beginning of the real hard times.
And the terrible choices, whether or not to have an abortion. For the approximately 5,000 children like these born with Down syndrome each year, Down syndrome means mental retardation, often heart and respiratory problems, and frequent infections. The only thing the genetic test can tell you is that the child will have the disease. However, it can't tell you how severe those problems will be.
6 seconds.
Meet 16-year-old Jason Kingsley. You might think Down syndrome hardly gets in his way.
Science. Science is my favorite thing. I'm learning about machines right now. I was studying sound and electricity and energy. Good luck with you.
Emily Kingsley tutors her son at home, but he goes to the local junior high school where he's in a special education class.
Ta-da! He certainly is fully independent in life management skills, dressing and showering and getting his teeth brushed and meeting his responsibilities, doing his household chores.
Because Emily Kingsley did not have a prenatal test, she didn't know in advance that Jason would have Down syndrome.
Okay.
In those days, I knew so little about what having a child with Down syndrome represented that I probably would have terminated that pregnancy. I would have missed out on what's become the most enriching experience of my life.
But you hear a far different story about a Down syndrome child when you talk to Pauline Odin. It's the story of a severely retarded son and a lifetime of challenges. After his birth, she had been advised to put him in an institution.
You decided not to put your baby in an institution. Why? Because I didn't know anything about what a Down syndrome child was. And I felt that if I could care for this child and love it, that it would become all right.
Pauline Odin wanted her son Chester with her at home to teach and nurture, hoping she could somehow make him better.
And you did care for him and love him for 31 years. Yes. In your thinking, did he become all right? No, he never became all right in the sense what we call all right.
Despite the love of 10 brothers and sisters, Ruth, as they nicknamed him, never grew beyond the mental age of 4. He was a child in an adult's body.
Ruth could not cross the street, even at 31 years old. He didn't understand waiting in line. And he would get very impatient and be very frustrated, and he would make noises and try to shove somebody and say, "Move out of the way, let my mother through."
Ruth died suddenly last January of viral pneumonia at the age of 31. In the months since then, Pauline Odin has had time to reflect on his life as well as her own.
Mrs. Odin, if you were a young woman today and you had amniocentesis and you were told that the child would have Down syndrome, knowing what you know today, what would you do? I would not have the child. I love Ruth dearly, and I am glad to have had the experience, but I would never want to experience again.
All right. See you guys on Wednesday.